Okay, sorry, just give me a second while
We'll
I get
give
this.
you a sec. We'll give you a sec.
There we go.
Okay. Okay, so then it's been one of those that blessed days and years. And if we feel like I really don't want to say that we're at the end of the year, because yeah, we're just in a space of saying, you know, please God, that we should just fill every single day, and not just remember that when we're going to come to our holidays, we do have another week here still on Thursday nights. Everybody's already started. People are traveling already. And I'm saying, just remind ourselves that wherever and whatever we are doing, wherever we're going to, Hashem is with us on holiday. And one of the things that I find a little bit challenging is also going to be, not that we don't look after ourselves, as we're going to learn now from Rebbetzen Ross, is just understanding that, you know, that Sunday, that we're going to be, you know, who knows, we might not be fasting, but if we are going to be fasting, don't be worrying and thinking, yay, I can do my washing straight after because we're going away the next day. Remind yourselves that while we're waiting for Mashiach, that every moment is going to be like that. I want to thank Rebbetzen Ross for coming in at such short notice and being with us. And we are only going to have about half an hour learning marathon, which is very exciting for all of us. And we will be doing Hafrashas Chala after. So I'm going to keep quiet now and hand over. And Gila, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Rebbetzen Dav. It's always a pleasure to do. Firstly, it's a pleasure to do anything with Rebbetzen Dav, and it's always a pleasure to be here on the Thursday night to do Wiser Women. So yes, as Rebbetzen Dav said, we are going to try and condense it in, and the truth is, it's a topic that I think gets a lot of talk in the world, right? But I don't know how often we kind of look at this topic specifically from a Jewish perspective. And that's what I wanted to kind of look at tonight, because it is such an important part, you know, and especially we're coming into the summer. It's hopefully a time where we can sort of focus a little bit more on the self-care. So the way we're going to look at it is, we're going to look at it in two parts. So self-care is really two words. So we're going to look at what is self, and then once we have an understanding of that self, then how do we look after that? So I'm going to start by asking you a question, and the question, a very, very simple question. Who are you? An easy question for a Thursday evening. I'm sure it's been, you know, whatever your week's been like, I'm sure you're ready to answer any easy question. So question that I'm going to ask you is, who are you? And I want you to, before you even answer the question, I want you to do one thing. I want you to point at yourself. Okay, so I can see a few people on screen, and I can tell you that I've asked this question many, many, many times, including, I think, a couple of times over the past few weeks. And I've asked it to lots and lots of people. And the vast majority of people, when you ask them to point to themselves, they point here, somewhere around about here. Which, what does it mean? Does it mean that this is kind of the area where the heart is? Does that mean that I am my heart? Does that mean that if someone were to have a heart transplant, for example, do they then become a new person? No, that's not really what we're pointing at, right? When we're pointing at here, we're not saying that my heart or my neck or wherever this region is the most important part of us. We kind of intuitively recognize that there is something within us that makes us who we are, right? And that's something that we are, that's within us. We point to over here. It's not really, it doesn't have a physical place in our body. It's our soul, right? Now, are you a soul? So I can see some nods of the heads, but I'm going to challenge you on that. Anyone would disagree with that? Are we a soul? It's not what you're expecting to hear on a Thursday night Wiser Women, right? Of course we're a soul. But the truth is, we're not just a soul, right? We're a body too, right? And I think perhaps it's more accurate to say that we are half body and half soul. And the truth is, when we look at the world and we think about the world that we live in a world where we see predominantly someone else's body, right? When you first meet someone, we notice their body, we notice how they look, etc. We don't live in a world where the soul is more predominant than the body. We live in a world and if you think about how much of our day gets taken up by taking care of our body, right? So much of our day, from sleeping and eating and cooking and shopping and laundry and all these different things and working to be able to buy all those things or whatever it is, right? So much of our day and our lives revolve around taking care of our body. So we are at least half body and half soul. And interestingly, and Rebbetzen Daf brought this up, we're in the 3 weeks and we're in the time period where we intensely noticing the lack in the world, right? And that lack in the world that we're hoping is going to get fixed is going to happen with the coming of Mashiach, right? And what one of the things Mashiach will do is it'll bring in the phase of Tchias HaMesim, the phase of the resuscitation of the dead, right? Which what does it mean? It means basically is that we are a body and a soul, both together. And in this world, when we live in this lifetime, our body and our soul are together, right? Unfortunately, when a person passes away, the body and the soul go different places, right? The body gets buried, the soul goes to the world of souls. But that's not the end for either of them, the body or the soul. The ultimate is going to be in the world to come, after Mashiach comes, after Messiah comes, when the body and the soul are going to be reunited together again in the resuscitation of the dead. So I think it's an important point to bear in mind, is that it's not that we are just a soul and we have a body while we're in this world. It's that we are half body and half soul, right? So it's the first thing to bear in mind is that when we're looking at self is half body, half soul. Now, what is this soul? Very, very briefly, what is this soul? We're told that the Torah says that when Hashem created the world and God created the world, he formed Adam from the ground, and then he blew a breath into Adam, and that is the soul of mankind, right? That is a soul, that was the soul of Adam, and that's the soul of us. It's kind of like a spark of divine. And keep that in mind, because we're going to come back to it when we talk about how we care for that part of ourselves, but just keep that in mind. Before we move into the care part of, now that we have a little bit more of an understanding that we have these kind of like these two parts, the body and the soul, let's try and understand a little bit of what's the relationship between the body and the soul, right? What is the relationship between the two of them? Are they a relationship where they kind of get on very well, or are they a relationship where they're, against each other? They work against each other. I don't know if anyone wants to volunteer an answer, but I kind of picked up a vibe from noticing the people who have the screens, that when I said this struggle, that people kind of related to it, and I think it is something we relate to, right? Anyone that is in touch with their soul relates to that struggle. And the truth is, even if you're not in touch with your soul, everyone relates to that struggle, because how does that struggle of body and soul show up in our life? And I'll give you an example, right? When an animal is born, a cow is a cow, right? We don't, if you were a farmer, you don't look at the calf that's born and think like, I wonder what type of calf this is going to become, right? I wonder what it's going to go on to do and achieve, right? Like the same sort of thing, when you kind of look at a newborn baby and you look at the baby like sleeping peacefully, and you kind of like wonder about them, like, what's going to be like, what's your personality going to look like? What are you going to go on to achieve? And the reason why we don't is because a cow, an animal, is an animal, right? It's born and it lives its potential, right? A cow, I'm just using a cow, but you can relate it to any other animal. It doesn't sit in the field and ponder at the end of the day, am I close to fulfilling my potential or not, right? A cow, it eats the grass and does whatever it does, and it knows that it was born a cow, it really is a cow. A human, on the other hand, is born with potential. And interestingly, when Hashem created mankind, when Hashem created the world, after most days, Hashem said, and he saw that it was good. After God created man, Hashem didn't say, and God saw that it was good. Why? Not because people are bad is because it's up to us to make it good, right? God created us, right? And if you look at it, you know, a newborn baby or even a small child, we don't know what's going to be. And for anyone that's a parent or that is in education with children, almost all of our worries about our kids, whether they're ours or our grandkids, whether the collective younger generation, almost all of our worries boil down to this, right? The fact that we don't know how they're going to turn out, right? People can be good and they could be bad, right? They have potential, but it's up to us to develop that potential, right? And the struggle, right, is a struggle between what our body wants and what our soul wants. Our soul wants to develop our potential. Our body, not so much. Our body kind of says, you know what? I just want to be comfortable, right? I want to, you know, I want to enjoy I want to enjoy what the world has to offer. I want to be comfortable, right? Potential, all that, very nice. As long as you're not going to bother me too much, right? Like, don't make me work too hard. Don't make me get out of my comfort zone. Don't make me get out off the couch. Like, at least as long as you don't make me get off the couch, like I'm good, kind of thing, right? So that really is kind of why the struggle between our body and our soul. But there's also another relationship of the body and the soul together. And this is a relationship, a very complementary relationship. And I'll explain this by way of an analogy. So there was a king and he had a safe, and in that safe he kept his money, he kept his jewels, he kept a lot of very valuable stuff. And because it was safe and it was his valuable stuff, he appointed 2 guards to protect it. And one of those guards happened to be blind, and the second guard happened to be lame. And he put them in charge. Now, one day he goes into his safe and he notices that he's missing a substantial amount of money. So what does he do? Is he calls his 2 guards into his office or wherever the king does these types of things, and he first calls the blind guy in, the blind guard, and he says to him, "Listen, you must have stolen because you're in charge of that room." And the blind guard says to him, "Are you crazy? I can't see. How would I possibly be able to steal money from you?" So he sends him out, calls in the lame guard, and the lame guard kind of like hobbles in, barely's able to walk, and he says to him, "You must have stolen." And the lame guard, you know, looks at him and he's like, "Are you crazy? Like, did you not see the way I walked into this room? I could barely move, right? Like, how am I possibly going to have the energy and the abilities to steal from you?" Now, the king's a very smart king. So what does he do? Is he calls both of them in together, the blind one and the lame one. And he says, "I know what you were up to," right? The blind one, you put the lame one on your shoulder. The lame guard, you acted as the eyes for the blind person. You showed him where the money was, and together you stole from me. So together, I'm going to punish you both. And that's another way of looking at the relationship between our body and our soul. And in fact, the Talmud says that at the end of a person's life, a person is going to go up to heaven, and Hashem is going to judge them. And the soul's going to say, "Wasn't me. Look at me. You know, I'm free of the body, and all I want to do is I want to soar, right? Like all those bad things, nothing to do with me." And the body's going to say, "Nothing to do with me." Like the soul's gone, and I'm like completely, I'm completely ineffective, right? We've never heard of a dead person who's done anything wrong, right, or anything right? But and that's eventually why Hashem says Hashem's going to bring back the body and the soul together in the resurrection of the Zed and at the end of time, because both the body and the soul are together accomplish things. And in this analogy, the blind person is our body, right? Our body has the capabilities to do things. Our hands can help, they can also hurt, right? Our mouth can say words of encouragement. They can say hurtful words, right? Every part of our body, if you think about it, our body has the capability to do things. But it's like the blind person, the blind guard, it can't really see. The soul, on the other hand, is lame. It cannot do anything on its own, but it's the vision, right? The soul is the vision. The soul is the one that reminds us and says to us, you should be doing this. And by the way, this is a little bit off topic, but if you ever want to identify where a voice is coming from, whether it's coming from the body or the soul, this is the way it is, right? Usually when there's two types, right? Like let's just say, there's a piece of chocolate cake and you know that you should be eating that healthy dinner instead of the chocolate cake or a good breakfast, right? There's two voices that come. There's a voice that says, "Ooh, I want chocolate cake." And then there's another voice that says, you know what? You really should have a healthy, balanced breakfast this morning, right? Which one is the body and which one is the soul? The one that says, I want, is always the body, the voice of the body, right? The voice of the body, we feel it, right? It's I. And the voice of the soul is that like quiet little voice that says, you should. You should. So that's kind of how we identify it. But so basically what we've said so far is that we have a body and a soul. We're half body, we're half soul. And there's a relationship between them. The relationship between them is that there is a struggle because, yes, they want different things. But it's not just a struggle because they complement each other. And the best way, right, to use that half body and that half soul is to allow our soul to be the eyes, right? To set the vision, to say, you know what? This is what I should do, right? Listen to that voice that tells us, this is what you should do. This is the vision for who you are. And then the body is the one that carries out the vision. So now we have a little bit of an understanding of who we are, right? Who is the self that we're trying to care for? Now, obviously, if the self is two parts, it's half body, half soul. So self-care is in two parts as well, right? It's care for the body and it's care for the soul. Now, interestingly enough, a lot of discussion around self-care is focused very, very much on the body and very little about the soul. That's difference number one between, when we talk about the Jewish approach to self-care and the Western society secular approach to self-care, is that most of the Western society definition of self-care is very much focused on the body, right? This could be in certain cases there's a little bit of talk about care of the soul, but there's another difference as well, is that in Jewish law, in halacha, there is a law that we have to look after and maintain our body, right? We have to. We have a mitzvah, nishmartem ad nafshechem. Hashem gave us a body, and He gave it to us because we have a precious purpose, a precious mission here on this world, and we have to take care of that body because that's the best way you're going to do it. If you're thinking about it, right? If the body is that the blind guard, right? The thing that can do that. Imagine if you had a Mercedes in your front garden, or a Jaguar, or a nice car, right? You can top of the range car. You're going to take care of it, right? Why? Because you realize it could do stuff. You take care of it. It'll last a long time. It'll drive places. It's the same thing with our body. We have to take care of it, right? But here's the second difference with it, right? Very often in secular thought, when we talk about the care of the body, that's where it ends, right? That's where it ends, right? You take care of your body because you take care of your body. But the Jewish approach to self-care is you take care of the body because they're here for a higher purpose, right? And it's interesting even that even our taking care of our body can be a mitzvah, right? And even our drives, right? Our desire for food, for sleep, all that can be elevated to a mitzvah. And I'll give you an example of this. On Pesach, before Pesach starts, we're not supposed to eat too late in the afternoon. And the reason being is because you're supposed to have a little bit of an appetite. There's a mitzvah to eat matzah on Pesach, and you're supposed to develop a little bit of an appetite for it. Now, what I think Rav Wolbe points out and says is that a person who eats without appetite it's not called eating, right? You have to use that appetite, you have to develop that appetite and then use that appetite for a higher purpose, right? To eat the mitzvah. And it's the same thing, if you have an appetite to eat, use it, but elevate it, because remind yourself, like, I'm here for a higher purpose. I'm looking after my body because I have a soul and a body, and together they're going to do great things. Like, I've got this precious, unique purpose in this world, so I've got to look after it. And interestingly, on the flip side of it, going back to Pesach, a person that just eats the Paschal offering, for example, the Carbon Pesach, without, limits and just eats too much of it, is also accountable, right? Because you overeat and then suddenly you lose that mitzvah of it, right? If a person is overeating, or if a person is oversleeping, or a person is doing something in excess, it no longer becomes a place of looking after ourselves, but it becomes a place where it loses its status of a mitzvah. So when we talk about self-care, right? And the first part of the self-care is caring for the body. And it's so important to know that number one, it's a mitzvah, right? It's a mitzvah to take care of our body and to use those drives that Hashem gives us, right? God gives us, he gives us a hunger, and he gives us, a tiredness and a desire to sleep. And when we use all of that to take care of our bodies in the best way possible, then that itself becomes a mitzvah. But obviously, there's a second part of self-care, right? And that is taking care of our soul. Now, the first thing we have to realize is that if you think about it, right, you think about the fact that you have a soul, and we think about the definition I gave you right at the beginning of when we were started to speak about the soul, is the soul is a breath that God breathed into Adam, right? God it's a breath, right? It's a spark from Hashem. Like, what does that tell us? Right? What does that tell you about yourself? The fact that you have a soul tells you that you have incredible potential, right? That you have, like, there's a piece of divine within you, right? Like, whatever you think your limitations are, like, no, there is a piece of the divine, and it tells us that we're here for a higher purpose. So how do we look after this precious part of us that shows us that we're here we're here for a higher purpose? So the way that we do that is that we have to pursue the things that brings us closer to Hashem, and flee from that which detracts us from Hashem. Now, how do we know what that is? How do we know what that is? So the truth is that we're told, we've given a manual, right? God gave us a Torah, and in the Torah it says what the mitzvahs are, and it says, right, there are certain things that you do that are going to bring you closer to God, and there are certain things that you do that are going to take you away. Now, sometimes some of those things are very clear for us to understand, right? We everyone understands how when you're kind to someone else, when you give charity to someone else, that's developing your soul, right? That's bringing you closer to God. There are other things that are not so clear to understand, and we have to learn a little bit more and try and get to a place where we can understand. But also the thing also is that when a person has faith, right, that's when they develop knowledge. And I'll give you an example, right? If, let's say, someone you trust tells you, you're looking for someone to fix your car, and someone you trust tells you, you know what, the best mechanic is Mr. John Smith, for example, and you trust that person, right? So you try him out. Now you know that Mr. John Smith is a good mechanic. On the flip side of it is, if someone, you're looking for a mechanic and someone tells you Mr. John Smith is a good mechanic, but you don't really trust that person, right? And you don't try out whether Mr. John Smith is a good mechanic or not, you're not going to have that knowledge, right? So when we have faith in Hashem, right, and a person obviously has to go through and have that faith, then we acquire the knowledge of how to look after our soul, because some of it we can understand, but a lot of it is we don't understand, right? I'll give you an example. Kosher, right? How does eating this versus that look after my soul, right? It's a knowledge that's based on faith, right? That because we have that faith that God created us, and God knows what's good for us and what's damaging to us, and he told us that knowledge, then we have the knowledge of, okay, this is what I have to do, and this is what I have to, this is what I have to stay away from. So what does it look like when a person looks after their soul, and this is a story that I want to kind of tell, and then I kind of bring it back to ourselves. So there was a rabbi called Rabbi Shimshon Pincus, and he was really, one of the things that he was well known for was his care for other people. And he was obviously a person who developed his soul, developed his spirituality, developed his mitzvahs, his connection to Hashem, his connection to other people. And one day, one of his friends is driving him home. And he says to his friend, you know what, do me a favor, drop me off around the corner. And his friend is intrigued. He's like, why on earth would Rabbi Shimshon Pincus want to drop me off around the corner? So he drops me off around the corner, but then he drives past his house. And he notices something. I don't know how he noticed, but I guess he was good enough friends that he could do this. He walks past his window or whatever, and he notices in his bedroom, there's just a pillow and a blanket. There's no bed anymore. So he goes back to Rav Shimshon Pincus the next day, and he says, out of interest, what happened to your bed? And Rav Shimshon Pincus tries to change the conversation, tries to avoid the question, but his friend is smart, and he says to him, what happened to your bed? And he's not taking, these diversions for an answer. So Rav Shimshon Pincus says to him, listen, a couple of days ago, one of my students came to me. He's getting married shortly, and he financially doesn't have enough money. So I told him, listen, I just happen to have a spare bed, and I gave him my bed, right? And he didn't want his friend. Oh, but that's why he told his friend to drop him around the corner, because he didn't want to publicize it. But if you think about it, right, if we hear someone comes to us and tells us, I need a bed, right? Our soul tells us, wow, I wish I could help. And our body kind of says, I need my bed, right? Like most of us, again, the truth is, I'm not gonna make any assumptions. I'm gonna talk about myself, right? When, if someone were to ask me for a bed, I would try and do whatever I can, and maybe I was trying to give a donation or whatever, or point them in, but I'm not giving up my bed, right? Because it's too important to my body, right? And the reason why Rav Shimshon Pincus was because he was so in touch with his soul that he heard the voice of his soul that was saying, but you can do something positive with this bed, that he was willing to have his body be uncomfortable. But I want to bring it back to us, because I think sometimes when we hear these stories, right, they're very, very inspiring, right? We hear these stories, and two things can kind of happen to us. We can kind of feel like, wow, that was so inspiring. But we can also kind of feel like, whoa, that's way out of my reach. I'm not giving up my bed, or I'm not giving up my this, I'm not giving up my other. But the question that I want to leave you with is, we all have a voice of our soul. What is one way, or what is something that we can do to listen to that voice and make it just a little bit stronger every day? So thank you very much, everyone, for listening. I hope I gave you a little bit of understanding of self, and of how to care for both parts of the body and the soul. And the question, and maybe a question to think about, of how do we look after that voice of the soul, and maybe then we heard a little bit louder.
And a great love. Thank you, and thank you. And I think that we're all going to be thinking while we are
very much
doing our